Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those in different jurisdictions. As Kamala said, we have two really fantastic panelists this morning. So we have Mrs. Claire Gomez-Miller and we have Mr. Frederick Bowen. Mrs. Gomez-Miller is a chartered certified accountant and a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants of the UK and a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Trinidad and Tobago. She's also a certified internal auditor and a certified risk management assurance professional of the Institute of Internal Auditors Incorporated of the USA. Mrs. Gomez-Miller is currently serving as a board member of state and private organizations in the energy, insurance, and financial sectors. She's executive chairman of Colonial Life Insurance Company Trinidad Limited, CLICO, and of British American Insurance Company Trinidad Limited, that were under Central Bank's control during the period 2009 to 2022. She is the chairman of Methanol Holdings International Limited and of Premium Security Services Limited, and is also a member of the boards of Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, Alutech, United Independent Petroleum Marketing Company Limited, UNIPET, and Oman Methanol Company. Mrs. Gomez-Miller has more than 30 years internal auditing, risk management, and governance experience in both the state and private organizations within the energy, insurance, and financial sectors at senior executive and board levels. She was the chief audit executive for the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago group of companies from 2000 until her retirement in 2014. She served as NGC's Group Enterprise Risk Management Facilitator, a member of the board's Audit and Risk Committee of Atlantic LNG and National Energy Skills Center, board director, board Audit and Risk Committee chair of Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited, Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Petrotrin, and board director of Labdeco and Lake Asphalt. She has also served as president board member of the Institute of Internal Auditors of Trinidad and Tobago and as a certified instructor, district advisor, and board committee member with the Institute of Internal Auditors of the United States of America, and board member of the Trinidad and Tobago Society for Quality. Mrs. Gomez-Miller's expertise, practical experience, and knowledge are widely recognized as facilitators and speakers at seminars locally, regionally, and internationally for board directors, officers, internal auditors, and professionals in private and state enterprises on corporate governance, enterprise risk management, internal auditing, fraud and investigations, quality management, and procurement. We also have Mr. Frederick Bowen. Mr. Bowen is a seasoned professional in the field of supply chain management with a 38-year career across various organizational levels encompassing advisory, consultancy, managerial, and technical domains. Mr. Bowen was an MBA with honors from the Andrews University of Michigan in the United States and a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Management from the University of the West Indies. Additionally, he possesses a postgraduate diploma in Purchasing and Supply Management from the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply in London. He also has certifications in business planning and development, neuro-linguistics programming, business law, strategic procurement planning, and business communication. In his most recent role as the supply chain management advisor at Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Mr. Bowen exhibited exceptional leadership and proficiency. His notable achievements include the development of governance policies and procedures aligned with Trinidad and Tobago's procurement legislation, thereby ensuring 100% compliance. His strategic initiatives, such as the implementation of an e-auction platform and the categorization of goods and services, have significantly contributed to the company's long-term strategic objectives. Beyond his professional endeavors, Mr. Bowen is deeply committed to philanthropy and social responsibility. He has served as president and member of the Rotary Club of Couva Point Lisas and played pivotal roles within the UE St. Augustine Alumni Association for over 18 years. His dedication extends to serving on various boards, including the National Maintenance and Security and Training Company, where he was a former member up to recently. Throughout his career, Bowen has demonstrated exceptional leadership, analytical prowess, and negotiation skills. His ability to foster strong networks and communicate effectively has earned him recognition as a distinguished professional in the field of supply chain management. His diverse qualifications, extensive experience, and corporate exposure position him as an invaluable asset to our proceedings today. So I open the floor to our first panelist, Ms. Claire Gomez-Miller, who will take us to lead the conversation right now.
So good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ceronne.
Good morning.
So I must make a disclaimer to start with. Some of those appointments that you deem current have ended in 2023, which would be my appointment as executive chairman of CLICO. I'm still the chairman of British American Insurance Company. No longer the chairman or board member of Methanol Holdings, Premium Security Services, which one again? And Oman Methanol. But I am still I'm the chairman of British American Insurance. I am member of the Revenue Authority, Alutech, and Unipet. So I think we will share the updated profile sometime before the end of today's session. Kamala, I sent an updated one to you.
Great, yes, thank you, Claire, and we will make sure to put it in the chat for our participants today.
Thank you very much. Right. I still look as gorgeous as the picture, though. I don't think that has changed.
Yes, you do.
Absolutely agree.
And I guess that is why I have much more time to spend with Kamala and her association. Yes, so it is always a pleasure to be here sharing my knowledge and experience, and also I would want to say poking some fun at ourselves as we go through from 2013 to now, looking at public procurement. And even before that, it started with the white paper. I think some of us present here will recall the procurement white paper. I think that might have been prior to 2000. So this public procurement matter has been in the making for years. And I'm happy to see that I'm still alive and strong when it has been proclaimed, so that we can actually see it in operations. Notwithstanding the lengthy period of time that we had to prepare ourselves for this matter, we still find ourselves being challenged, especially the public bodies, the statutory organizations, the very said government agencies, even the ministries are still being challenged today, although it is now fully proclaimed. I think there might be just a few sections that still remain unproclaimed, but basically everyone must be in compliance with the public procurement legislation. Now, when we think of public procurement, we feel that the act is only affecting those public bodies and government agencies, etc. But if you go through the legislation, it also speaks to what the suppliers of goods, works, and services to those types of organizations have to do. So there is a role, there are responsibilities, there are duties that are also placed on the suppliers, consultants, contractors, vendors, anyone who is providing goods, works, and services of whatever nature to the bodies who are being regulated under the legislation as procuring entity fall under the legislation. So it is very, very important for us to understand it from that perspective. So right now, a lot of the training, the guidelines, etc., are targeted at the procuring entities. But the suppliers to those procuring entities need to start understanding how powerful this piece of legislation is. Let me just look at one document here. All right. So the Act speaks to, I'm just pulling up exactly what the Act says when it was enacted. Right. It says it's an act to provide for public procurement and for the retention and disposal of public property in accordance with the principles of good governance, namely accountability, transparency, integrity, and value for money. And of course, the establishment of the Office of the Procurement Regulation and the repeal of the Central Tenders Board Act and other related matters. So the intention of the act was very wide. And as such, it impacted the entire Central Tenders Board that had been procuring goods, works, and services on behalf of the ministries and certain government entities. And now you find that each of these entities must have their own procurement unit, their chief procurement officer, and the responsibility for ensuring that there's compliance with the legislation falls on the shoulders of the chief procurement officer. So who is impacted by the act? As we said before, they speak of the public body, and they mention the office of the president, the parliament, regional health authorities, a statutory body, state control and enterprise service commission. It's a long list, but incorporated and unincorporated in relation to any function which it exercises on behalf of the state, but incorporated or unincorporated entity in relation to any function, project, scheme, or arrangement which involves the use by it of public money. So once it is that you start using public money, you have to account for those public monies, how you're spending it, making sure that what it is given to you to spend, you are spending it accordingly. And if it is that you're using it now to purchase, it means to say that you have to procure such contracts and arrangements in compliance of the legislation. And public money means money that is received or receivable by a public body, raised by an instrument from which it can be reasonably inferred that the state accepts ultimate liability in the case of default, spent or committed for future expenditure by a public body, distributed by a public body to a person, raised in accordance with a written law for public purpose or appropriated by Parliament. And then, of course, you have public-private partnership arrangement, which includes an arrangement between a public body and a private party, under which the private party undertakes to perform a public function or provide a service on behalf of the public body. So looking at an example, which is very much alive, would be the situation that occurred when the government provided that bailout for CLICO, British American Insurance Company, and the CLICO Investment Bank. Those three organizations were subsidiaries of CL Financial, and CL Financial would have been the one that would have been at fault. However, because of the actions that were taking place between the parent company CLF and those subsidiary companies, you found that you had severe financial distress in the organizations, to the point that they were placed under central banks, which is the regulator. So you had total control up until 2022, the end of 2022 for CLICO and BAT. And you had CLICO Investment Bank being liquidated. So then that company has been liquidated as early as 2020. It went into liquidation, I believe, around 2014, 2015. And it is no longer an operating organization. Right. So what you had here was, because of that bailout, you would find those organizations falling under public bodies because you're using public funds until it is fully repaid. So CLICO, I believe, would have already been completely repaid at the end of my tenure. We were in the midst of settling that last final payment. So at this point in time, CLICO should be free as being a public body. But it is still a fact that it would have been a public body from the time that they proclaimed that section as defining it as a public body. Right? British American Insurance Company still remains a public body. So it's amazing that you're looking at private organizations that have become public bodies because of events. And that is why it is so important to understand events that can now place an organization under the regulation, yeah, and the legislative framework of this Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. So it's very, very important to understand that. The objects of the Act, and we always have to go back to that. What was the intention behind this Act? And that is why you find that non-compliance of the Act is very challenging from the perspective of, yes, you may want to look at it from the technical perspective of making sure that you comply with the words of the legislation, but there's something that is called the spirit and intent of the legislation. Yes, always remember this, the spirit and intent of the legislation. And what you have here is that objects and section 5 of the legislation. The objects of this act are to promote the principles of accountability, integrity, transparency, and value for money. So at any point in time, any decision that you're making, you must be able to question whether you have this accountability, integrity, transparency, and value for money. Then you have another one, efficiency, fairness, equity, and public confidence. And as you may recognize, in the public domain would have been the matter between Maritime and the central bank over the sale of the insurance portfolio for CLICO and BAT, where it was said that there was a conditional bid that was made by the successful bidder, and as such, you now had the unsuccessful bidder challenging. And that challenge has gone straight up to the Privy Council, and that substantive matter is still to be heard. So it means to say that even before the legislation was fully proclaimed, you had challenges taking place. So we have to understand how serious this legislation is and what is required of all the organizations. So there are things that would have been done if you're a private organization. Yes, it means to say that as a private organization, you can accept your bids, you can have certain boundaries, etc. The legislation was not fully proclaimed at that point in time. The OPR is now setting up, because the first parts of the legislation that was proclaimed would have allowed for the establishment and operationalization of the OPR. And that is why you found that it was not unlawful, yeah, to conduct business in certain manners. And also, too, you would have had the doubt as to whether it is the public body definition extended to certain organizations, etc. So again, it would appear as if it is this legislation has come into full proclamation in 2023, but you need to go back in history, because you will be caught up in it from one perspective or the other. Right. The other part of the objects was the local industry development, sustainable procurement, and sustainable development in public procurement and the disposal of public property. So what you're looking at is when you're making a decision in procuring or disposing of any or of your property, disposing of property, or in the acquisition of any goods, goods, and services, you must go back to the objects of the Act. And you have to be asking yourself, do we fit within the ambit of the objects? Or is it there somewhere, is it that we are being fair when it is that we allow a conditional bid, and when in the RFP, we did not state that you could have made conditional bid. Yes. So, so simple things, you have to go back in again and make sure you understand all elements of the objects so that you can make sure that what decision that is being made can withstand that scrutiny. A public body shall carry out public procurement and the disposal of public property in a manner that is consistent with the objects of this act. So the proclamation that came through, I think in 2023, started making these enforcements now. So although in 2015, that objects would have been in place and the definition for public body would have been in place, you are now looking at when it becomes unlawful for that transaction. And it became unlawful when those sections of the legislation was proclaimed. So it wasn't until 2023 that you started seeing proclamation. You saw some proclamation also in 2019 or 2020? 2020, I think that you would have had some proclamation, some additional proclamations. Yeah. The illegality of procurement or disposal, which is very important for you to understand, right? So the Act Section 6 states, subject to subsection 2, any procurement of goods, works, or services, or retention or disposal of public property that is not done in accordance with this Act, and any procurement, contract, or agreement that is not entered into in accordance with this Act shall be void and illegal. Yeah, and nothing in subsection 1 shall affect the rights of an innocent third party. So the third party here would be any party, especially the supplier or the bidder, yes, or the successful bidder, because you're looking at not only persons within the procurement, the procuring entity, but those who are in the process. So you want to make sure that when you are going through this legislation and you are expecting to apply the handbooks, yeah, your procurement handbooks, or make decisions, you understand it from this perspective. So it's not only just the chief procurement officer will be called into question, you would have everyone along the process being questioned. Right. Of note is that bid rigging definition that they have included. I do believe that there was some amendment to that bid rigging definition, but I think Mr. Frederick Bowen will deal with that. Yes, but I just need to draw it to your attention that the legislation speaks not only to the objects, which is the intent and spirit of the stated intent of the legislation, but it also made sure it brought in that bid rigging. And in this act, bid rigging means collusion between persons for the purpose of manipulating the proceedings. And here's where you find it now. You want to make sure that when you are into that procurement process, you try as far as possible not to have any outside parties being a part of that proceedings. You want to make sure that you restrict your proceedings to certain authorized persons within the organization with a high level of confidentiality throughout the process. It is very important. Otherwise, what you may find is you are going to be challenged. It can be challenged by someone within the organization. It can be a party that has nothing to do with the supplier or the procurement entity. Yeah, or it could be an unsuccessful contractor. Somebody can lay a complaint with the OPR and trigger an investigation. Yes, so you have to understand that bid rigging means a very wide range of fraudulent actions, collusions, yes, manipulations that can take place where it is at the end of the day, the wrong person ended up with the contract. So they become the successful bidder. Or you may find price manipulation, yes, A lot of things, you know, a lot of fraud can take place within the procurement process, and I believe that might be another session completely. But understanding that when you are setting up your procurement internal control framework and the governance structure, have to understand these two areas, the objects and what this bid rigging means. Otherwise, you will find yourself individually, collectively, having to answer to the law. And you do have some fierce penalties for non-compliance with the legislation. Another area that I want to touch on is the area of due diligence. So yes, you may find that the legislation under the being enacted by the, or I should say being operationalized by the OPR, they would have set out a database with suppliers who have gone through some level of I would want to say pre-qualification for them to get onto that listing that you can get and use those contractors. However, it is at your own risk. So even though, yes, OPR would do some screening of those contractors, etc., it means you are still responsible for the conduct of your own due diligence. And the legislation clearly states that a procuring entity shall ensure that suppliers and contractors have the legal capacity to enter into the procurement contract, are not insolvent, in receivership, bankrupt, or being wound up. Their affairs are not being administered by a court or a judicial officer. Their business activities have not been suspended, and they are not the subject of legal proceedings for any of the foregoing. Have not, and their directors or officers have not been convicted of any criminal offense. And hence you find that character of certificate is, you know, like every 6 months or so you have to go now and get one, because you can be a director and officer today who's not a criminal, but by next month you have become a criminal. Yes. Have fulfilled their obligations to pay all required taxes and contributions in Trinidad and Tobago. And you're actually seeing that, because if anyone who's listed on that database, one of the fundamental checks that OPR would have done is to make sure that you have evidence you have paid up all of your taxes and contributions in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's a good way for the Revenue Authority to make sure that revenues are starting to come in.
Yes, Claire, not to interject what you're saying, but I just want to make reference to that excellent point that you just made concerning the responsibility of the procuring entity to also conduct the due diligence exercise.
Yes.
Because now that we have this pre-qualification process, it's like, okay, we have to pass through the OPR and whatnot. There seems to me, from my interaction with certain entities, okay, well, OPR will just do that. So we don't have anything to do on our end. But no, OPR would do up to a certain level, a degree, but you as the procuring entity still have work to do concerning who you are engaging with.
Yeah. Yes. So, and I think sometimes organizations might forget that, especially government entities that relied upon the Central Tenders Board to do all of these due diligence, etc. So now that they are forced to do it, it will be a challenge for them. But I know the OPR is there to support them. So it's just a matter of making sure that as we enter into this first year of the act being fully proclaimed, that we walk with caution.
Yes. Mr. Bowen has his hand up. You'd like to make a contribution?
So at this point, I want to ask Ceronne, as you're moderating the session, I know, but Claire, let's invite Frederick to do his points now, and then we would follow up with the conversation between both of you and open up to Q&A.
Okay. Well, so, before I finish my session, I would just want to go on my next point. So that was the due diligence. And then there's one more point that I wanted to go into, which is the governance structure for public procurement and disposal. Because there's a misunderstanding there that, need to get rid of the board procurement and tenders committee. And I have been advising, do not do that. Now is the time for the board procurement and tenders committee. to increase its oversight of the procurement function. Yes, the only part that is being removed from the board is really that decision-making part, because normally what you would find, the board will determine who is the successful bid. Also, although you may have a recommendation coming through from the management tenders committee or the chief procurement officer, and you would find the decision being made by the board procurement and tenders committee level, and or depending on the financial levels, the board itself. So that final decision maker as to who to award the contract, yes, would always land in the arms of the board members. In this instance here, the procurement legislation is saying, no, we want to make sure that the procurement function remains with that decision-making as any other function within the organization. So the board now is being removed of that executive decision-making. So it means to say all of the controls have to be built in up front. It means to say your budget, your strategic procurement plan for the next 3 years, because in some instances, your strategic plan will span 5 years. You must know what it is that you're going into, especially if it is capital expenditure that is will go through not only 1 year, but let's say 3 or 4 years. So all of that must be captured. The life cycle and of that entire process is what it is that you're now looking at. So the management, procurement and tenders committee will now have a lot more decision making. So that committee will be there, which will be of your executive personnel, or your at least your personnel from your managers or chief officers, etc., and whatnot, will form that committee. But the board committees must stay. So just that the terms of reference will now have to change as to how they increase that oversight. And I will stop here for now.
Yes, thank you so much, Claire, for making that distinction in terms of oversight. You know, the legislation has some significant changes, but boards still have a duty to the company to oversee what is happening. Yeah, so it's not that the board tenders committee now has nothing to do because you're not making decisions. You know, we have to set the policies. We have to do procurement plans and whatnot, and we have to make sure the management they have these systems in place to follow. Yeah, and that point you made about the management procurement committee separate and apart from the board's tenders and contracts or procurement committee. But Mr. Bowen had a question earlier, so let's invite him into the conversation.
Well, at this point in time, I just want to say I'm really amazed and appreciative of Claire's contribution in terms of the change in the nature of procurement in Trinidad and Tobago, not only in terms of private sector, but public sector. And she made a very important point in that it's not just the Procurement Act and its regulations that have been approved, and there are 2 other amendments that will come in soon. It's not just about public bodies alone, but also people who do business with public bodies. There are 2 things that Claire said, though, that I need to correct in a way, in terms of, one, the depository, the OPR depository is exactly what that is. It's a depository where people who are wishing to do business with public bodies register their information there and provide the due diligence information that Claire spoke about. And she's correct when she said, no, the pre-qualification of these registered suppliers in the depository is the responsibility of the individual public body to ensure that they meet the requirements outlined in the Act and in also the requirements of their own business to operate safely, efficiently, and to provide value for money when they are pre-qualified and engaged in a contract by any public body. So that's the distinction. The OPR does not really pre-qualify, but what it does is ensure that you have the prerequisites and that your bona fides, and yes, you paid your taxes, you have NIS clearance, you have a great safety record, you have references, you've developed your lines of business, etc. So once that is done and you publish your lines of business, it's very easy then for a public body who may want that particular good or service based on the line of business to select a group of people who are qualified for that using by the code of the lines of business, and then they be invited to tender, to bid for the good. So thank you, Claire, for that very lucid and clear, this no pun intended, discourse on the act and the impact it have on our procurement. The next issue now that I need to address very quickly, because it's a burning issue, is the role of the board.
Yeah.
The Companies Act provides that the board members have a fiduciary responsibility for the governance of the company, and that has not gone away. And then the Exchequer Act also gives them responsible for the funds that are dispersed to the public companies and are being spent via procurement of goods and services. However, with the proclamation of the Act, boards no longer have any role in the procurement activities, day-to-day procurement activities of the organization. That is made clear in section 61.2, where the chief accountable officer, be it the CEO, permanent secretary, the general manager, etc., right, has the responsibility now for the funds of the company, and he has dedicated the management and the responsibility for procurement of goods and services, the retention and disposal of goods and services, and management of contracts to a named procurement officer, where most organizations now call the chief procurement officer. And to put in a measure of control and mismitigation, the regulations and the Act speaks about the establishment of what you call the Procurement, Disposal, and Advisory Committee. This committee is made up of senior officers of the organization, and with the secretary, and the PDAC has its own terms of reference to rules and terms of operation. And what the PDAC does is that once the submission or the tender award recommendation meets the threshold for it to be submitted to the PDAC and then on to, well, normally would have gone on to the board, the PDAC would then review that submission to ensure that the whole process satisfied the main objectives of the Act: transparency, accountability, value for money, equity, and there's 15, but those are the main ones that you look at. If the PDAC in its review determine that the objectives of the Act are not being met, in other words, there's non-compliance with those objectives, they will document their concerns and send it back to the CPO for going back to the line department, who's responsible or who wants to go to service, to address those concerns. When the PDAC is satisfied with the responses, they will then send it forward with their recommendation, with their notes in terms of the mitigation recommendations to address any gaps they may see in terms of risk, performance, or issues that may impact the reputation of the company, or impact the fence line, or even the business community as a whole, so that the CEO could sign off and insist, that those mitigating actions are taken. So the role of the board now in companies is basically, yes, they approve the annual procurement plan. I might have heard them say they approve the annual budgets of the company, which is comprised of projects, CapEx and OpEx projects. They approve that. They approve the annual procurement plan to list all the projects and procurement activities, which is supplemented and supported by the annual schedule of planned procurement activities. The OPR now is only requesting that the schedule of planned procurement activities be submitted to its office for review and approval. This plan submitted by each public body will be used to monitor the activities, procurement activities of each public body by the quarterly reports that is sent into the OPR, in that the schedule of contracts awarded would be compared against the plan that was submitted after 6 months the budget was read in the parliament, and questions will be asked if there are any deviations without any supportive documentation. to explain the deviation. So I just wanted to correct the role of the board. However, recognizing the role and the fact that the board has a fiduciary responsibility in most instances when there's an issue or a problem occur in the atmosphere, first people go to is the board, not necessarily the CEO, and in some cases the minister. The board is allowed what is called a no objection review of the award. Notice I use the word award, because once the CEO signs off on the recommendation from the PDAC, the CPO now is mandated to award the contract. And of course, contract management will kick in with the department responsible, and of course, the risk people, HSSC, and of course, the supply chain department providing support. Once the board raises any objections, they are mandated to send it back to the CEO, who's supposed to get the responses and addresses and send it back to the board. If they're still not satisfied with the answers and they believe that there were gaps or there needs to be items to be addressed or they need additional information, they can then engage the internal audit department of the public body to do a review of that entire tender or procurement transactions. And thereafter, they can consider the results of that and take appropriate action or discussions with the CEO. And that is the process. The Act does not allow for the board to be involved in any aspect of award or tenders or deciding who should be tendered or who should be invited. That comes with consequences, which carry a fine and a jail term. So we need to protect the board members, but at the same time, they're the ones who will approve all the governance policies and procedures for procurement, contract management, retention, unsolicited proposals, etc. I hope that I cleared up that little area there for the role of the board for you all. So one of the things too that Claire touched on is managing risk in procurement. And that is a big topic. And one of the ways that is done prior to the Act and even now in both private and corporate companies, what I'm going to discuss is applicable, is that the corporate governance to mitigate risk in procurement must reflect the principle of segregation of responsibilities between the requisition department and the procurement department by separating as separate and distinct functions within the overall procurement process. At the same time, collaboration between the requisitioning and procurement department is essential to ensure companies audits obtain high quality goods and services that meet the applicable specifications, terms of reference, or scope of works at competitive prices and within the time frame required to achieve the strategic objectives of the organization. So how do we do this? How do we ensure this happens? So the procurement of all goods and services should adopt the following 6-step process to the extent which it becomes a primary function to develop the procurement strategy to be employed to support monetary value and risk profile desired outcomes. Claire touched a few of them earlier. The 6 steps are needs analysis. So we want something. We therefore need to define what we want, what quality we want, what specification, when we need it, how much we prepare to accommodate and pay for it based on the approved budget we have, and also to satisfy a situation or of opportunity, business opportunity that may emerge in the market. B, funding approval. Under the current Procurement Act, it is illegal to issue a contract and don't have funds to pay the supplier. That carries severe penalties of a fine or a jail term if the person who have done so did not have the authority or broke the rules of the company and also run afoul of the Act and its regulations. The procurement strategy and planning process is also critical in that this involves not just the requisitioning department and procurement, but also HSSC, the legal folks, information technology, finance, and if necessary, if in the internal to the organization, the expertise is not there, they can also work with another public body or engage a subject matter expert on a contract to provide that support. Excuse me. The next phase is supplier selection. And that is where the Office of Procurement Regulation depository comes in for public bodies and for private bodies. This is where the pre-selection and pre-qualification function is critical to ensure that the right suppliers, and when I say suppliers, I cover the whole gambit of consultants, contractors, suppliers, etc. It's important that you select proper supplier selection. It's important that if you don't have, at the time you want to do the tender, sufficient suppliers selected or pre-qualified, you could write into your invitation to bid that they will undergo the pre-qualification process while the tender is being evaluated and managed, and the award would only be made to a pre-qualified supplier. And in a case where there are many pre-qualified suppliers, you can identify the criteria you'd use in your ITB to pre-select or to do a select competitive bid, in that it will add no value if you were to invite 40 or 50 people to the bid on a particular item, especially where they don't qualify for your financial capacity, performance capacity, or just being able to do a job of the size or nature that you want. So there are a number of factors you can use to manage the supplier selection for contracts. Contract management. This is critical in that you want to get value for money. You want to ensure, one, that the contractor bill of quantities when submitted for payment is made, it's verified. You want to ensure then that there are lessons learned. You have developed the performance KPIs, the HSSC KPIs, the financial KPIs for your contract. You need to put in place your people and your system to monitor those, to ensure that the contract is in accordance to the contract or project schedule, and the delivery is, the milestones achieved is exactly what you're looking for. Plus, you can then determine if there are any deviations from the schedule so that corrective action can be taken rather than at the end. Performance evaluation and lessons learned. There must always be a contract close-off session where all the key issues that arise in this contract while execution are reviewed, lessons are learned for future planning. To buttress and to secure the governance and controlling your risk in procurement, there's a four-phase approach that is recommended for public bodies that is also used by private companies. First phase of that is the contract strategy plan. Again, we talk about identifying the requirements, your scope requirements, set priorities and objectives. Plan and develop a procurement strategy and a risk mitigation planning along with that. You have to get your pre-project approval. And if you're a public body, you have to do the OPR notice and publication. Phase 2 is inviting proposal. You need to get your internal approvals to do that. You do your inquiry document development, which is the scope, ITB, and other attachments, specifications, data, etc., that the bidders will need in order to provide you with a very comprehensive and a fully responsive bid, right? And then you have your issue and tender management process in terms of whether you're going to do one envelope, two envelope, if you're going to do an e-tender, date and time of closing, and also the rules around that particular process. Phase 3, you're evaluating the proposal and awarding contracts. You would have done the evaluation criteria matrix in terms of when you're developing your contract strategy or plan. And as you're aware, this cannot be changed once the contract is awarded, save where you're possibly using a 2-envelope system. And in evaluating the technical change, you recognize that you could either make a significant improvement in the outcome of the project or save money with the concurrence of all. You have to communicate this to all the suppliers and then make that change, allow that change, and then to get a revised submittal, or in terms of them also upgrading the second envelope, which is commercial. If you don't have a 2-envelope system, you cannot change your evaluation criteria once the ITB is issued. And then, of course, you're in negotiation phase. Very important. This is a must mandatory phase now in public procurement in terms of negotiations. And after the negotiation, there can be a change in the scope or in the cost. when the project scheduled. Internal approvals and contract executions is also important in terms of the people who initiating the request should not be the final people also approving the payments. You need to separate those duties as part of your governance risk mitigation process. Before we started, we were discussing the issue around how could it possible then a financial institution can have a scam going on with the employees where loans are given to ghost people and money is collected and paid out over the years and it will not be detected simply because proper segregation of duties and roles, procurement initiation authority, approval authority, and payment authorities were not properly segregated. So, of course, again, for public bodies, once you award the contract, you are obligated to put notices on their website and publicize it. Issues like standstill period, etc., with setting. Private sectors have a different approach to this, where they just issue a letter of intent or a letter of award, and they may or may not choose to notify the other bidders that they were unsuccessful. The public bodies, you have to. Phase 4, contract management. Contract start date is determined. Supplier relationship management is critical in that you need to be able to be proactively manage your relationship with your vendor, not necessarily getting involved in their day-to-day operations, but in terms of how you contact with them, how you communicate, their conduct, your bench, in terms of the execution of the contract, the morning toolbox meetings, issues in terms of giving them the opportunity to be heard. If they see something, say something, to ensure that the job is executed safely and within budget. Performance management monitoring is also critical for your risk, in that you need to ensure that the people that you engage are the people that they submitted in their resumes. There may be times they need to subcontract. That information needs to be passed on to you and your team to ensure that the subcontractors meet your requirements with respect to performance, qualifications, experience, and safety. Of course, contract administration involves everything in terms of managing the variations, recording all the different issues that came up, and ensuring that the contractor is paid and the project is closed up properly. So, all of these items I just described there generate business value and a lot of lessons learned. In terms of the sourcing and contract management activities, I just want to touch on a few points. In that, in the contract strategy and risk mitigation plan, the aim is to identify procurement opportunities and develop and agree on a scope of work with the contract owner, and then commence a procurement strategy development. In other words, even though you may want to issue a tender and you indicate that interest to the procurement department may have on the pre-qualification list people who can do the job, but before they can engage them, there must be a signed off contract strategy and risk mitigation plan. This entails identifying potential sources of supply to meet the business need of the contract owner. Phase 2, inviting proposals. This involves developing the procurement strategy and associated tender documents and pro forma contracts so they can be issued to the bidders to see competitive results. One of the important things also, when you issue a contract, is the bid clarification meeting. That is so critical, and site visits, because they may tend to result in a change in the strategy, a change in the scope. It could also result in an enhanced value-added outcome for the procuring entity. And then, of course, phase 4, contract management. Well, my apologies, I went ahead of myself. Phase 3, evaluating and awarding contracts. This involves moving from receipt of proposals to contract award by means of an orderly evaluation model, continuously supported by the established evaluation committee generating recommendations to award and to issue the contract through the approval process through the PDAC or in private companies' tenders committees. And of course, I spoke about contract management before, which involves the management of the contractual relationship, between the supplier or contractor and the company to ensure the value and risk is identified and to realize the anticipated outcome for the business relationships. All right. So some of the general procurement principles that must be observed for both private and public companies is the company upholds honesty, integrity, and fairness in all aspects of its business and expect the same and the highest ethical standards to be employed in all procurement transactions, contract awards, supplier contract engagement. Guidelines on supplier-contractor relationships should be outlined in the organization vendor management policy and procedure so that everyone will be aware of it and refreshing and updating it every time a major contract or any business is done or quarterly or every 6 months through supplier conferences, etc. is important. 2, gifts and gratitude. All employees engaged in the acquisition of goods and services shall be guided by their company's policies on gifts and gratuities as specified in their code of ethics. Additional details on gifts and gratuities, inclusive of accepting gifts on behalf of the company, should be included in the human resource policies and procedures, right? Acceptance of gifts and the code of ethics section. An employee should consult with the supervisor or line manager and the senior manager with responsibility for procurement and any concerns or uncertainties around gifts and gratuities. In Trinidad, we are very gratuitous people. We have lunches, we have Christmas limes, we have trips down the islands and so on. One needs to define clearly in your own organization the acceptability or the values of which employees can indulge themselves to receiving these gifts and gratitude, if at all. Next principle you need to operate it is the best value for money. The guiding objective of the company in procurement of goods or services is to obtain the best value for money. The best value for money is not only based on price, but is the result of several factors, including technical specifications, quality, the total cost of ownership, experience and reputation of suppliers, benefits and parameters that measure how well the good, work, or service assist the company in achieving its objectives. Next key principle is fairness, integrity, and transparency. The company upholds honesty, integrity, and fairness in all aspects of its business and expects the same and the highest ethical standards to be employed in all procurement transactions, contracts award, and supplier or contractor engagements. And this is a big one I'm going to here now. Confidentiality. Employees shall not breach the confidentiality of information that they receive in the performance of their duties. It is considered unethical, illegal, and damaging to the company's competitive position to allow the company's proprietary information about one vendor's quotation or the outcome of an internal vendor evaluation to be passed to another vendor or unauthorized party. Claire made reference to bid rigging, and what she didn't mention too is collusion. This speaks to that, and as she pointed out, there are very severe penalties that comprise of a fine, not all, and a jail too. Procurement personnel and others involved in procurement should avoid placing calls, having documents on desk during supplier contractor interviews, and/or conversations among those involved in procuring goods or services within the hearing of other suppliers or contractors or unauthorized parties. Conflict of interest. A conflict of interest exists where employees involved in the procurement process and their relationship with one or more of the suppliers impairs their impartiality in the process. Employees and directors are expected to be free of interest or relationships that are actually or potentially inimical or detrimental to the best interests of the company. Additional details on the conflict of interest should be included in company's code of ethics and procurement handbooks and guidelines. It is critical and important for individuals' integrity and reputation to remain intact, that if there is a perceived conflict of interest and the guidelines will identify what constitutes a conflict of interest, each company will have that and it differs, they need to declare the conflict and let the senior management and the other officials involved determine whether the conflict is real or can impair the outcome of the award or place any other bidder at a disadvantage to give one an unfair advantage. Then we have now for public bodies and even private companies now public interest disclosure policy, and we see how well that has worked and how well it has worked and the problems it can create for a company in doing business here, both private and public. So companies should encourage employees and those working in the company in any other capacity to raise their concerns about any incidents of malpractice in the workplace at the earliest possible stage. The approach to whistleblowing is to enable staff to raise their concerns internally and to disclose the information they believe show malpractices or impropriety in the first instance without fear of reprisals. Anti-bribery and corruption. Companies need to recognize that their procurement activities involves high-value acquisition of goods and services, which makes it vulnerable to the risk of bribery and corruption. Accordingly, companies should be committed to the highest level of ethical standards, sound governance arrangements, and set high standards of impartiality, integrity, and objectivity in relation to its procurement and procurement services department. All companies, private and public, should have a zero tolerance for bribery and corruption. All right? So, based on the issues and the information I just shared, all companies should uphold honesty, integrity, and fairness in all aspects of its business and expect the same and the highest ethical standards to be employed in all procurement transactions, vendor awards, and vendor engagements. I thank you for the opportunity to bring this information to everyone.
Thank you very much for all those points. All very important points, very well received. Before we go on, I want to take two questions. We have a question from Denicia Daly and one from Anasha Ramdewal Singh. So Denicia is asking, can you clarify the availability of funding? Because we utilize the budgetary allocation for low value, low risk purchases. However, is it that we have to wait for releases first?
Once your project is approved with the budget, there's a timeline when the project has to be executed. So the management, the CEO, financial department has the responsibility to ensure the funds are available before you engage or award the contract, right? A lot of companies don't have a challenge. Some of them because of the timing and the fact that their budget, especially public bodies, is not in alignment with the September 1st reading of the budget. So what happens is that there's an overlap. And then their actual procurement plan and budgets needs to be approved by their board. And the timing of that board meeting for that approval also impairs the efficient award of tenders and start of projects. So there are many ways you could treat with that. In that, I think what needs to be done is have your scope done. You have identified who you're going to be going out to tender for, and put all those things in place and push to get management to move quickly and the board to recognize that sometimes they may need to bring forward that very important meeting to approve the annual budget to facilitate the execution of the planned schedule of activities to ensure contractors are being paid on time. We've had many over the years, hundreds of millions being owed to contractors. Some of them still are attempting to collect. Some of the companies have been wound down or wound up, and it's a perennial challenge that needs to be addressed.
Yes.
I hope I explained that for you.
Thank you so much for that. And if I could just add, that board meeting to approve the budget, that has to be an early thing. That has to be early in the fiscal year, and I remember working for a state entity, planning and what we didn't have the procurement legislation at that time. But there's this rush at the end of the fiscal year to utilize resources, to utilize the allocation. And many times multiple special meetings and whatnot. It's a very busy period. So to have the board meet urgently and whatnot. So yeah, timing throughout the fiscal year is extremely important to utilize your allocation and to plan.
I will lead
I
on
think-
Claire
yeah.
here too, because Claire
Yeah.
will let you know that a lot of the public bodies too depend on subventions and funding from the Ministry of Finance, and that isn't a challenge with respect to adhering to the fact that do not issue contracts unless you have the money to pay. So
Yes.
Claire, I know
Yes.
you're going to say something.
Yes, so looking at it from public body, and you're looking at the state enterprises, because the state enterprises tend to have a lot more control of their funds. So you would find that they know exactly what their cash flow is. They know exactly what is the cash balance in their bank accounts, and they more or less would have a sense of the income streams. So they have a lot more control over setting a sort of cash, let's say cash impress, that would allow them to know small items under maybe $1 million or 100,000 or whatever it is, can be procured. So it means to say the chief procurement officer must ensure that there's a continuous relationship with the chief financial officer, so that any liquidity issues are addressed. Now, when you come to the larger priced spend, you are looking now at source of funds. It is very important that when that before the contract is awarded, that you have a source of funds, and that is locked in for that procurement event. So they have to treat it from that perspective. So it might be a one-off procurement. It might not be a construction project or something as such that would take a lengthy period of time to be completed. But even if it's a one-off, it means to say if you sign the contract today, come next week, you might have a financial issue where it is your liquidity is not there to fund. It means to say that the chief procurement officer, your legal department, the chief legal officer who's locking in that contract, and especially too if it is that the contract has to be sealed, which means to say there must be approval by the board as to when that contract is to be sealed. Yes, so at all of those events, you must be able to know there is a source of fund dedicated for that spend. So the management of funds is very, very critical. Where it is that the organization is dependent on subventions, is a state of the ward. It means to say, or the ward of the state, I should say. It is a ward of the state. It means to say it's like living hand to mouth kind of thing. In a situation like that, you have to, again, be very cautious as to when you are signing that contract, when it is that you are issuing that purchase order, because that is the contract. So even though you may award and say, okay, we want you to start mobilizing, if it is that you want mobilizing, anytime there's any cost starting to be incurred by the contractor, it means you're already supposed to have a contract. And I think Mr. Bowen spoke of that before. So that contracting authority has to understand the timing. And sometimes you would find that, yes, you went out there with all intention of awarding a contract. But at that point in time, you have to make a decision. Should we award as of now or not to award? So you have those decision points throughout the process.
Yeah.
Yes, and that will allow you to manage the funding of your projects and to make sure that you don't end up being a criminal just because you signed a contract but you don't have any funds to pay the contractor.
You don't have the money to pay and you're ready to sign the contract.
You ordered the bottle of champagne knowing that your purse. Oops, I left the purse home.
I left my wallet at home.
Yeah.
We have another question from Anasha. In respect of the APP and the planned schedule activities as being notified to the OPR, can you kindly guide in respect of arising emergencies?
Okay. You have an emergency, you have to deal with your emergency. And therefore, what happens then is that in emergency, the normal, you don't have time to tender, you don't have the selection, you have to address, for example, if you have a collapsed wall, or if your equipment break down, you'll probably call in the person who will be able to address your emergency and help you mitigate that situation. What you do there, however, afterwards is ensure that whatever expenses, goods or services supplied properly documented, and it's the documents along with the value or amount paid or due to be paid. And of course, more than likely, the people you're calling should be either in the depository or pre-qualified by your company, unless it's a situation where you never really catered for that service so good because you didn't expect this emergency. And then what you do after that, you send the documentation through it, depending on the cost and the expense, through the approval workflow in your company. And if it reaches thresholds at the PDAC, it goes there for what you call ratification, not for approval, for ratification. In the PDAC will again look at the what was done, make sure it was done within the objectives of the act and the policies and procedures of the company that governs the emergency. Because every policy and procedure should have a section to treat with emergency.
Absolutely, absolutely. The procurement policy would usually have a section to treat with emergencies, but what I've found as well is the overuse and reliance on emergency because we fail to plan.
And
That's right.
Right.
Yes.
And here's where you would find that for an emergency procurement, you now need to have special approval. So you have to understand that there's not just the requisitioning department alone going to say, okay, this is an emergency. So you must have maybe a next layer certifying that this is an emergency. Otherwise, what you would have is bad planning. Yes, will always give you that emergency, and it's not an emergency. And so it means to say that managing the emergencies is very important. Otherwise, what you'll be doing is boycotting the very said procedures and policies that you would have set for your procurement. So you must have some sort of special approval for that emergency.
Yeah.
In my experience, work experience and companies in the processing and the police estate, what we treat with emergencies is that we develop a list of suppliers and contractors who are pre-qualified and enter an arrangement with them where we can call them public holiday, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock, and they respond. And then there's what we call a manual purchase order, which we issue. In other words, we give a commitment of that, yes, we acknowledge that you bought this one, and yes, we acknowledge that the prices will increase depending on how long it takes to address the emergency. And that information, as I said, is then formalized at the end of the job or the addressing of the emergency by the procurement and the operations department and sent through the approval flow, as I just described, so that it's properly documented. And then the lessons learned in that, for example, if you didn't have a particular good or service, that is something that we need to pre-qualify people to do and to add them onto the list of people that we normally treat for the business and also for emergencies. Anytime, as Ceronne said, most of the times work is being done only by emergency request, there's lack of planning, and the management of that company needs to take a serious look at what's happening in their procurement area.
So that event, there must be a risk event that is significant enough to trigger that emergency. So they must be able to explain that this event has occurred and you have been managing the risk has occurred, and this is what is happening. So we did not plan for it. Yes, otherwise you have to plan, you have to put in those controls up front that it allows a transparent process to occur, which means, as Bowen says, there's already a pre-qualified listing for those types of events. Sometimes an event might occur that is unique to the organization. So when you look at it, it was unreasonable for you to expect that anyone would sit down there and plan and pre-qualify for that type of service. Yes, and as such, you would find, again, now, because you're more likely not to get value for money. That's one thing, so you want to make sure that in that spend, you get that special approval. So it forces management now to think that if they have to look for that special approval, they have to justify.
And plan.
Yeah, have to justify.
Absolutely. And sometimes you may have an event, an unexpected event, caused by something beyond any particular person's control.
Yes.
But sometimes you may have an event caused by the malice of an individual. So, there should be some sort of consequence to things like that. We have a question from Mitchell. How do you ensure objectivity and fairness in selection of companies from the OPR depository for selective tendering process, especially when there are a lot of vendors for that particular line of business?
Good question.
Yeah, good question.
It comes back to why the depository is there. One, once a vendor is listed in the depository and their line of business is there, he or she had qualified fairly in that the due diligence was done, they met the requirements, and of course it would be identified. There are 6 levels of engagement for contracts, starting from 100,000 to 2 million, etc., and it goes right up to 100 million. So if you have several vendors who have that in that line of business that you want, your department has a responsibility now to determine whether you want to invite all, but why would you want to invite people who only could, from the line of business people, in the depository, they can only manage up to, let's say, a 10 million contract, but your estimate for your contract is 40 million. So right away, you have a very valid criteria to pre-select who you would invite. And that way you're fair and at least you'll be transparent in terms of your selection. So those are the criteria that you will use.
Yeah.
And as I said, once they're in the depository, they would have satisfied a number of the questions around fairness and objectivity in terms of selection. But you still have the responsibility after you issue a tender. And if you want to, based on the importance and the criticality of the job, you can also update, or if they're not pre-qualified, you pre-qualify with the organization. And if they are pre-qualified, ask them to update certain information that is critical to the success of the project you want to do.
Yeah, and the pre-qualification list should be managed on an ongoing basis. For example, if you have vendors that don't respond often, that could be a way to manage your listing of vendors if it's particularly large.
Yes, then that's a good point. Some of our companies do have a person assigned for pre-qualification and pre-selection because it's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
Because you got to remember that most instances recommended and in practice is that we update pre-qualified vendors information every 3 years. But then if you have an important contract, you're not going to wait until 3 years to get that information updated, right? So that if once who you select based on other criteria, you will ask them to update their information. Also, the companies established, depending on the size of the company, and there are whole departments doing pre-qualifications. I've worked with companies like that, and it's a very critical aspect of the whole procurement and planning and risk management strategy. And that too, in terms of the evaluators, it's made up of different multidiscipline professionals within the company, from finance right down to HSSE, IT, depending on the item or the subject matter that you're looking to procure. Yeah. So it's an ongoing process.
And that process for your pre-qualification and shortlisting has to be governed by your board policy, because it is fraught for fraud if it is that you manipulate the process from that pre-qualification.
That's correct.
All right. So fraud enters your door if it is not controlled at that point. That pre-qualified listing Yeah, that shortlisting, your board policy as to how you go about inviting tenders or bids. Do you invite all that the organization has on its pre-qualified listing? Is it the top 10? And then if it is you have the top 10, what does that mean? How do you determine that you're only inviting this top 10? Are you manipulating that top 10? What are the criteria for you to be at that top 10? Yes, also to how do you ensure that your performance evaluation process of those suppliers are considered in managing that pre-qualification listing? Because as Bowen said, you oftentimes you may do pre-qualification every 3 years. That's not sufficient because of yes, you pre-qualify and you're so selected when you were invited for bids. They were successful, but then you fail to perform to evaluate their performance. And now you have them still on the listing and there's another contract. Yeah. How do you ensure that the performance assessments are taken into consideration in managing that pre-qualification listing?
Absolutely. That list has to be managed on our own.
Yes.
Mitchum is also asking if a foreign company that provides specialized crucial services is not registered with the OPR, can the public entity still do business with that company?
The answer is yes. If you need these goods and services, and there's no other, based on the fact that you may have had the equipment before, so the technology uses proprietary to them. Of course, you have to engage them because you as a public body have to deliver goods and services. However, you need to enter into conversations with the supplier, and I've seen that happen already. Big companies tell us, this headache you're putting us through, your orders are too small, you know. I had to look to China and satisfy orders in Germany and other places. This big procurement order just inconveniencing us, and they give a lot of trouble. But then again, it's how you vendor manage, your whole vendor manage approach in building the relationship, especially if you know that particular company, goods and equipment, is critical to your operations. So yes, you have no choice but to buy, and you know that, and you point that out to the OPR. And I have assisted and directed a number of foreign companies whose initial response was, no, I'm not getting involved. But when they hear something, when they actually got involved and saw the lines of business, and the lines of business are universal. And the fact is that they don't have to ask or be invited in that. When public bodies publish according to the line what their requirements are, they say, but this thing has value for us because we don't even have to ask or wait or read or determine when a tender is coming out. We are notified, it's on the website, we can go now and plan. So that is how you sell it to them, in that they have their benefits from to both sides of the equation, where we can procure your services, and then you have the ability now to go on not only my company website, but all the other public bodies in Trinidad and Tobago, and you might be discovered that there's opportunity to sell other products that you carry. This is a conversation and a relationship building process.
Yes, for state entities, there's the State Enterprise Performance Monitoring Manual, and there's a section in there on vendor management. And I remember the state entity I work with wasn't one of the entities that are bound by the manual, but we took the requirements of the manual, including vendor management, into account when developing the procurement policy. And it's a nice, thorough, comprehensive section that the manual has. The state entities could look at for vendor management.
Yes, I think anyone can use that manual as best practice, so that when it is that you're setting up your own standard operating policies and procedures, you're guided by that, because your organization should not be less than what is established in such documents. Yeah.
However, just remember that for public bodies, the OPR handbooks and guidelines enhance on this SEM, and also provide more additional, I heard say, up-to-date CDS and guidelines for not only private but public bodies to use too, because it's fully aligned to modern procurement practices.
OPR handbook, it's on the website.
Everything is there. There's a house that you're invited to at anytime you can enter at any hour, and it provides all the information, templates, guidelines, rules, procedures for engaging any aspect of procurement, including regulations and the legislative regulatory framework for it.
We
So
have
the
a question.
fingertips.
Yes, we have a question from Candice, Candice Calendar. How do we treat with NGOs and donations under this act?
That's a very excellent question. I'll allow Ms. Gomez to go first. Sorry, Ms. Williams.
Yeah. I think we have to understand it firstly as public monies, and then you have to go through the objects of it. Yes, so that accountability and transparency again is very important, and also to they can have their procurement policies and procedures vetted by the OPR. So it does not become too onerous, but at the same time, we must understand it is public money, the objects of the act, they must be mindful of it and be guided by the OPR.
Right, and that is correct. And what the OPR recognizes also, a lot of these NGOs don't have the capacity to have what you call a procurement department. Most of them are people, they are volunteer people who work there, and they don't have the experience. So what is happening is that the OPR have recognized this, but the fact that they get subventions, some financing from the government, they recognize there's a need for them for accountability and for them to fall under the ambit of the act. So they're working and developing right now. I know that a special handbook to treat with them. The recommendation, however, is that they need to publish their annual procurement activities for both capital projects and operational projects. Well, some of them don't even have a website, but they need to do that and submit it to the OPR and have it available when if need is the case may be. So it's a work in progress with NGOs. An excellent question. And whatever donation, once is not public money, the donations it's managed privately by the NGO, but it's an issue that is being currently looked at. Oh, what I would like to see on that though, the act was amended to afford spend up to $1 million without being under the purview of the act, and just have to be reported when you're sending in your quarterly returns to the OPR's office. But public bodies, NGOs can do procurement up to $1 million and ensure that you're not doing it or breaking up procurement, that at the end of the year, that particular procurement of that good or service exceeds the $1 million budgetary year. And then there's also something called micro purchasing up to $50,000, but you need to report it when you're submitting your reports to the OPR on the quarterly basis. So it facilitates the efficient operations of the NGOs and other smaller companies.
Yes.
And even big ministries too.
I think one of the things we're noticing about the OPR is that the OPR, when you think of a regulator, you think of somebody with a big stick. But the OPR also provides guidance and advice. So you know, Mr. Bowen just raised a point. You could send, I think it was Claire raised the point. You could send your policies and whatnot for review and maybe some sort of feedback. So that's a good attribute, and people should know this about the OPR, you know.
And you can also adopt all the handbooks and guidelines with the templates and inform them that you have adopted it, and you're working within those, developing the templates and timeline, and you continuously use them, and you'll be compliant with the act and the policies and procedures of the office.
And this is also asking, do the NGOs have to be registered on the depository?
Yes, as a public body, yes. Right, and also go up and this their lines of business. The office has a help desk, a bit of system in doing that, and of course there are other people with the experience who they could probably ask for help from or engage.
Yeah, I'm a part of an NGO, and the OPR website, there were some sessions and videos you can actually look at.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, that guide you as to how we can go about becoming registered, the entire process from beginning to pre-qualification. It's very helpful videos. Denicia is asking, how do we treat with donations from the public? For instance, purchasers who make donations to councils.
That has to be documented in that each council has to have their own internal policy. Because if somebody make a donation to a council, clearly the management need to take note of it, in that you don't want that donation, be it kind or cash, to disappear. It has to be accounted for. But it's not public money. However, if they give you cash and you accept it, and it's let's say a city council, a regional corporation, that cash automatically now becomes public money, yeah? And therefore it has to be accounted for in your entire governance process. Because there's a donation, the amount, what was it donated for? And even if it's a general donation, it's donated for a specific purpose, ensure that it is spent on that purpose. All right.
Yeah.
Some persons they give donations, based on what their personal belief is. They will give donations anonymously, but in terms of everything that is happening with nonprofits and all those risks, I think it's important to know who you are receiving monies from.
Yeah, there's another aspect in that. You're correct.
Money laundering.
Source of funds. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, because you have your money laundering legislation.
That's right.
Yes. So all of those sort of legislation now can trap you, even if it is you're the giver or the receiver.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a lot of, and even the financial institutions, they have certain guidelines now. Know your customer.
That's correct.
You don't have to fill out the KYC forms as burdensome as we find them. We have to fill out the forms, and we need to know and have that track, even donations in cash. Should we really be doing that?
Because the source of funds, I think you have to make sure that you understand. And a lot of times the organization is not accounting for that source of funds, where it is coming from, and if it is you're getting it, what was the purpose? Did you commit at that point in time when you received it, even though you're receiving it as a gift? Because I think Bowen spoke of before gifts. Did you receive it as a personal gift, or did you receive it on behalf of the organization? And that's very important. And it's not only cash, it can be any asset. And how do you account for it transparently? So,
yeah.
Critical.
You always hear of gifts and procurement, that the code of ethics, right? Very, very important. It's an excellent complement to your procurement policy in terms of receiving gifts. And the timing of the gifts, if I'm going through a tender exercise, don't send me 4 all-inclusive tickets while we engaging in that tender exercise and your potential supplier. So a lot of these things concerning gifts, it's not just the value of it, but the timing of it. Is it really a gift out of just, we are very gratuitous people, or are you looking for something? I remember in a boardroom, and there was all this of gifts, and I had to make the point is like, not everything is free, but it's free, we're getting this for free. It's like everything has a cost. Everything has a cost.
Yeah, there's a string to it, so we need to understand where the string ends.
One of the mitigating actions a company do when gifts, unsolicited gifts like that come, is that they do a raffle amount of staff.
Yeah.
That's not just staff in the procurement department, but generally.
Yes. Stacey is saying, I accept absolutely nothing.
Very good.
Absolutely nothing. And just send it right back where it came from if it comes.
But you see, if it is your organization is not a gift giver, then it is okay. So the organization policy itself must say the organization is not going to give gifts. Yes, so you cannot on one hand say that you're not accepting gift, but you're giving. So right. So it means it comes back down to gifts, giving and receiving. You have to look at it from the both perspective. So there are organizations that will decide, okay, we are going to give for certain reasons. And you have to, and again, you have to come back to what is the fundamental intent of the organization when it is giving gifts, when it is receiving gifts. If it is also to their certain countries, they are invited. Yes, and their belief is to welcome you with a welcome gift. Yes, and you are representatives of the organization. Can you afford to refuse that gift? Can you? So
on behalf of the company.
Right.
And that's the culture. That's the culture.
Yeah, well, you have to guide that culture within your organization so that they can understand when it is appropriate to give and receive.
Yeah.
Some ethics guides and conflict of interest actually give a value in terms of what you can accept as a gift.
Yes.
You can proceed and have luncheon meetings or dinners.
Yeah.
Suppliers, once it's dealing with the issue of building the working relationship and not to discuss a tender also. Yeah. And in terms of gifts, for example, gifts up to the user figure $500 is acceptable. Anything over that, you need to declare it with your manager and your other people and get permission to receive it. If not, return it, or they may decide to let's say raffle it, and that is communicated to the giver.
That's correct.
So they will get the message that we really don't appreciate you sending gifts to our people, but at the same time, we don't want to slight you, and we want to build a relationship, but it has to be within the framework in which we do business and operate and our ethics policy.
Right. And an envelope coming to you with cash should not be accepted. It is very easy. Yeah, it is very easy for you to be set up, you know, and especially in these days with everyone has a camera on their phone, it is easy for an envelope to reach your desk. When you open it, there's a wad of cash. Yeah. Or a simple situation where it is the supplier says, okay, did you receive an envelope from me? Yes. Well, I sent you some cash in it. You received an envelope, which means to say that once you say, yes, you received the envelope, is his word against yours, what was in that envelope. So again, you have to make sure who are the persons authorized to open your mail before you get that mail. Yes, and how do they log what's inside there? And what do you do when it is a package of cash comes in? You have to know exactly how to react, because from the moment she brings that and she drops it on your desk and she says, Mrs. Miller, I just received an envelope with your name on it. Yes, I opened it and there's a wad of cash. Yeah, I left it on your desk. Wow. Regardless of what I do with it thereafter, there is already a story to be told. Yeah. Yes, and so we have to be able to think of things from a practical perspective and how easy it is when you have a culture of accepting gifts, yeah, and not being conscious as to how should you treat it at each point, and how do you protect yourself, especially if you're an officer or a director of the organization, yeah, or someone in that procurement process.
Okay. The whole issue of culture, you know, very important word. I mean, the procurement legislation, I welcome it. I think it's a, you know, Claire spoke about how long, you know, things were happening way before, you know, so good things come to those who wait. I welcome it.
And who are alive and healthy and who can appreciate it finally, you know.
Yeah, and it's a work in progress.
And it's a work in progress.
I was very young then, you know.
You're still young now. So no, but you know, I remember around 2015, when it first came to our attention, our board, we had training sessions, getting ready for the legislation, and there was resistance. There was resistance at that point in time, and I think even now there's still some resistance because we're going against the tide with this piece of legislation.
Yeah.
So when a wad of cash comes forward, and these are realities, these are realities that people in procurement face. It's a risky position, the procurement officer. You know, who are the type of people, the attributes of the people that we are placing in these positions? You know, Mr. Bowen spoke about performance management, but maybe from the recruitment stage, what's the type of individual you're looking for? Because that person is swimming against the tide. You know,
but it's the same thing that when you are doing business, you're not only doing business with the employees. Yes, you are doing business with everyone that you pay money to. So when it is that you're paying a supplier, you have to understand who you're doing business with. So the person might have the capacity, they might have had experience with multiple projects, and as such, they meet your criteria. But you have to go beyond that. You also have to determine, is there some criminal proceedings or criminal investigation that is taking place, maybe in another country. Oh, so you have to be very mindful as to who you are doing business with. Because by the time you engage them, you have started, the contractor started, yes, as they say, your head is in the lion's mouth. Are you willing to pull your head out and at least try to salvage the rest of your body? Yeah, even your reputation, or do you continue with it? Because I have seen situations where it is an organization and starts engaging with this organization, and then midway, you started seeing something criminal in nature turning up somewhere else. You have to make a decision to terminate the contract. Now, the contract might not have appropriate termination clauses to allow you to unilaterally terminate. But you have to make a decision as a company, as a board, as to, is it that we're going to terminate and let them take us to court? In the meantime, now, what is happening with your project? What is happening with your own, yeah? If it is, let's say, for instance, you're supplying goods, and this is going to impact your business, what do you do? So you do have those dilemmas that will come upon an organization. And that is why throughout the procurement process, and we talked about having a department or a unit or even a person dedicated to certain parts of the process, like your due diligence, your pre-qualification, etc. Then you must be able to have that environmental scan taking place continuously. So it's not about having your pre-qualified listing and then leaving it alone for the next 3 years. You must continuously look and examine what is happening, yeah, to those persons on that listing and even those persons you have already awarded contracts to. Yes. So it's a very exciting area. Yes. But at the same time, it is fraught with a lot of criminal and unethical behavior that takes place from both sides if it is those types of behaviors are not managed.
Some companies institute conflict of interest declarations, which general staff have to sign on an annual basis, and then the staff involved in procurement activities, be it procurement department, finance, engineering, HSSC. Some come to companies every time they meet to discuss an evaluation or a tender, they need to sign one of those forms also.
Yes.
Every time. I've been through that already in my career.
Yes.
We Mr. Bowen, Mrs. Gomez-Miller, we're getting ready to wrap up. So do you have any closing remarks for participants? I think there's a lot of procurement students and procurement professionals we have here. Anything you want to leave them with?
All right. Well, for one, thank you, Kamala, for sending that updated profile for me. Thank you. My life changes, on a day-to-day basis. So, yes. But I think I made my statement before. I think that once it is that you are in the procurement function, you have any part to do with procurement, you may not be within the day-to-day procurement process, but you may be called upon to maybe sit on an evaluation committee. You may be part of maybe a management, procurement and tenders committee, and that you may just be called upon to replace someone. Yes, it is very important for you to understand the fundamental principles. The fundamental principles, and you go back again to the objects of the act, that due diligence. Yes, so there are some fundamental principles that you must understand. And the rest of it, you will have the subject matter experts like the Chief Procurement Officer to guide you along the way. But once it is that you start participating in that procurement process, you must be aware of the fundamental principles.
Right. And what I would say is that we have an opportunity, those involved in procurement, governance, and finance, and not just from the procurement department, to be change agents. It's estimated that we lose $5 billion TT a year through corruption.
Yeah.
You got to remember that we are just occupying the space temporarily. We have the young ones coming up behind us who will take over the industry, will have their own homes, will have their own ideals. We want to be able to ensure that we give them an environment to grow, an environment where they can make the right choices. So as someone involved in procurement or someone involved in the spending or management of governance of companies, let us change the environment that we operate in and support the Procurement Act, the OPR and handbooks and guidelines to ensure that we leave a better Trinidad and Tobago that we met. Thank you.